Every expectant mother knows that what she eats impacts her baby. And now research shows that is also true for our cows. Maternal consumption of ReaShure during late gestation had a positive effect on the in utero calf, setting her up for better health and potentially even higher milk production once she joins the milking string. Learn more at balchemanh.com/launch and launch your herd for life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Lecture Series. My name is Kim Jones, part of the marketing team at Balchem. We're so excited to welcome Dr. Mike Van Amburgh for today's webinar. Mike has joined us a few times here and also become part of the Real Science Exchange podcast. But today's discussion has really generated a lot of interest. We'll walk through the key updates coming in CNCPS version 7. Dr. Van Amburgh is a professor in the Department of Animal Science and a Stephen H. Weiss Presidential Fellow at Cornell University, where he has a dual appointment in teaching and research. His undergraduate degree is from The Ohio State University, and his PhD is from Cornell University. He teaches multiple courses and leads the Cornell Dairy Fellows Program, advises approximately 50 undergraduate students, and is the advisor for the Cornell University Dairy Science Club. Mike currently leads the development of the Cornell Net Carbohydrate and Protein System, otherwise known as CNCPS, CPM Dairy, which is the nutrition evaluation and formulation model used worldwide. Through the modeling effort, he focuses on enhancing the efficiency of nutrient use by ruminants to improve the environmental impact of animal food production. Thank you for joining us, Mike. You should now have control of the screen.
All right, Kim, thank you very much. Let me get this up there. And here we go. How's that?
Yep, we are seeing it.
Okay, very good. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Balchem for inviting me to do this. The invitation came. Scotty asked me what we could do, and I said, well, and then they said, well, let's talk about version 7. I said, okay. This title came from Lance Baumgard at a request that he gave for the Southwest Nutrition Conference. So this is a little bit of a reprise of that talk. So with that, there's a large group of, I'm going to move fast here once I get going. There's a large group of co-authors here. Everybody's, and there's a few names that aren't on here, I just recognized. But this has been a 10, 12-year project, 40 years if you want to add everything else in there. It's kind of like a garage project that we're slowly getting out of the garage. And we have sent it off to some programmers, so it has left the building. And we hope to have that back. Andrew would like to be able to show it off by Cornell Nutrition Conference. We'll see. All right, so with that, I'll get going here. So outline for today, model guided research approach. I think the one thing we've learned over time is that, because we've worked with the model for so long, we know when it works and when it doesn't work, and it's a love-hate relationship, right? We're going to have a hypothesis. We're going to go out and we're going to test it on some cows. The cows are going to tell us whether our hypothesis is any good, and we accept it or we reject it. And if we reject it, that means we learned something, and that then we go back to the model and fix, kind of figure out how we need to fix it or what we need to do to get it to describe right. So there's some chemistry, there's some biology. We'll talk a little bit about how the chemistry is used and what that means to digestible amino acids and to digestible fiber. We're going to talk about some of the new chemistry for fiber and what that means, from our perspective, what that means when you're formulating a diet to predict rumen fill and flux and feed intake, right? New chemistry for amino acids and what it means for limiting amino acids. I'm not going to have a lot of time to get into that today, but we'll talk about the application of it, and then which translates into studies evaluating the model, and then we'll summarize. So what's new, right? And in the interest of time, I'm not going to belabor this. There's a lot here, but the model now has a dynamic structure for the entire gastrointestinal tract. It is a mouth to rectum model, right? We have an abomasum, we have a small intestine, we have a large intestine. We've converted everything to a nitrogen and amino acid basis. We can back calculate crude protein, but we'd like to eliminate the use of the term crude protein. That sounds like a really bold statement, but crude protein as a percentage, as it moves, again, you can quantify it, but each amino acid has its own nitrogen content. So if you want to clarify how that amino acid nitrogen is moving, allowing each amino acid to have its own nitrogen content and using that makes it a lot easier. And converting back to crude protein really confuses that, because it's not, it's not the Jones factor 6.25. So it also allows us to look at meal pattern. You get a hint of that here today. The disaggregation of the potentially digestible NDF into fast and slow pools. We've been at that quite a while. You can use that in 6.5. It is fully implemented in this model, and it's really the only way it runs. Utilization of NOR4 passage rates for NDF. As we were building the model, we realized that we had to upgrade the passage rates. We scoured the literature, and one of the calculations developed for the NOR4 model was actually really good. So we've adopted that. Inclusion of protozoal metabolism in the microbial submodel. I'm gonna come back to that a little bit. If I told you that, we've talked about bacteria for 40 years or better, and not microbes. We're still not talking about, some other things, but in protozoa, they can be 10 to 20% of the amino acid flow, depending upon the cow and the diet. So without those, we're never going to get the amino acids right. And we probably won't predict NDF digestibility correctly either, or ammonia production. So getting the protozoa in there has been instrumental in helping us kind of get a better prediction out of the entire rumen. Mechanistic submodel for estimation of urea nitrogen recycling. So we have a full recycling model that includes endogenous all along the gastrointestinal tract. So that gives us a pretty strong, it gives us a good comfort based on a few studies where we can essentially tell you what rumen ammonia is going to look like. And if you layer meal pattern over that, we can tell you how time budget might impact that. And it even gets to the point where we can tell you what changes in digestibility, NDF digestibility especially, you may see if you're deficient. We have expansion of the, as I said, post-rumen to the small and a mechanistic large intestine model, so we can have some digestion in the large intestine. Fiber, and that's roughly 5% right now, it's fixed. We can use the Ross assay to estimate, to help formulate for nitrogen digestibility. I'm not going to talk about that today, but that's fully incorporated in there if you can get it. And then some post-absorptive efficiencies of amino acid use towards production, right? And that's all based on energy. So these are some of the big picture things. Any one of these by themselves is interesting. When you put them all together, it gives you a very different solution sometimes. The predictions are all the same, MP, ME, it's microbes now. We might break it out into protozoa. But when you put it all together, the capacity is greatly enhanced. It's still, we've maintained the old KD over KD plus KP, calculations that were generated in the late 60s and early 70s. We still run everything off of KD, rate of degradation, which is intrinsic to the feed. We still run the KPs, which is intrinsic to the animal. We use that to calculate disappearance of the substrate. We calculate the microbial growth directly from the disappearance of that carbohydrate. And then again, we predict ME and MP based on the integration of all of that information in a stock and flow system, right? And we're a little more dynamic now, right? Because we've got some interactions, and you'll see that more in a minute. So that's, but the basic guts of it, in many regards, even though it's dynamic, we're still using we're still using the old approach in a newer, more complete framework. If you want a quick snapshot, again, this is This is the CNCPS architecture in version 7 in Vensim. This is the Rumen submodel. We've got Rumen volume, nitrogen, fiber carbohydrates, endogenous nitrogen flows, non-fiber carbohydrates, VFA, CO2, and methane production. And you can see here, what's constants, what's not, blue, red, pink. Again, each one of these interactions is a differential equation, all right? And there's a lot of interactions there. This is not the format that everybody's going to see in the field. This is what we've sent to programmers. We've extracted the equations, and it's being programmed into a DLL that everybody who wants to license it will receive. All right. So in the general structure, we have a rumen volume, and the rumen volume is going to be, it's highly correlated with body weight. So as you change body weights, the rumen volume is going to change. If you have large cows or smaller cows, jerseys, crossbreds, whatever they might be, there's a lot of updated nitrogen transactions that are really important as we think about reducing the amount of nitrogen we feed. We've got soluble nitrogen escape. We've got peptide and free amino acid escape. We have endogenous nitrogen flows, and the endogenous nitrogen flows, we took this from the work of Daniel Lillet and Helene Lapierre. The microbes will use some of this endogenous nitrogen, so we allow for microbial incorporation based on their data. And then there's going to be some free endogenous that flow out, and this is all going to go to the duodenum and the ileum and be digested either within the microbial compartment or free. But that's all accounted for and is actually part of the recycling. We have the fiber carbohydrate digestion in 3 pools. The non-fiber carbohydrate digestion, sugar, starch, things like that. We have protozoal metabolism now, and this is important because now, we always wanted to remove the protozoa, we thought, because they predate so many bacteria. And I agree, trying to get that prediction right is really interesting with the passage rate, but we've kind of found our happy spot now after a couple studies, because they do consume a lot of bacteria for their nitrogen needs. They love sugar though, right? And they can reproduce pretty fast. That's one of the other things we've learned, a lot faster than we thought, right? And they contribute to the amino acid supply. Plus we have VFA, carbohydrate and methane production kind of in a rudimentary form here. We'd love to build a more robust VFA submodel. We're working on branch chain VFAs right now. Hope to have that done soon to be able to incorporate. Post-ruminally, again, nitrogen feed fractionation based on digestion. And again, some of that has nitrogen or urea recycling and nitrogen excretion components to it. We have post-ruminal carbohydrate digestion, non-fiber carbohydrate digestion. Obviously, the bacteria and the protozoa have to digest. So that's upgraded to be small intestine, large intestine. Again, talked about the gases in the VFAs, and then our ME and MP calculation is post-rumen. So overall, this is again snapshots of what we're doing. To get into the recycling, right? This is a diagram I've used a long time, but cows consume nitrogen, goes into the rumen. The bacteria are going to convert some of it to deaminate it, produce ammonia. That's going to go to urea. And there's lots of places that can be disposed of, right? One of the things that most of the field-based models have underestimated or ignored is how much of this is recycled and the efficiency of use. All right. And again, we've used a series of literature and a couple studies. The summary from Niels Christensen and Chris Reynolds was helpful. Some of the recycling work from Aaron Rechtenwald's PhD was important here, and a couple other studies where we feel pretty good about. We were at one point chasing all the transporters, and after doing a few kind of quantitative studies, we realized cows are fairly uniform in their recycling, and the transporters, they can do what they want with those. They they're pretty quantitative in recycling. As long as we understand how much that is, and it's mathematically fairly discrete, then we can just go ahead and model it. And here's an example of what that looks like. So we are using, the old 5.5 milligrams per deciliter as kind of our lower threshold. And in some of the studies that we've run, that is where things kind of break down. And then we run into negative nitrogen balances. Now, in this particular situation here, what you see, and Andrew pulled these together, so you can see this gray line here. First of all, this wave function that you see is meal pattern. So every time you see an uptick in the wave, that's a meal, and then you see the decay, and then another meal, and then it increases. The gray is a canola-based diet. All right, so all the protein in the diet is coming from canola. This orange color is soybean, same diet, just replace the canola with soybean meal. And because canola is not as soluble, you don't see as much rumen ammonia, but you exchange it with soybean meal, which is more ruminally digestible, and now you see more rumen available nitrogen. And then if you make combinations of the two and add some urea in there, you can see these much larger swings. And once you add the urea in there, or a split between the soybean meal and canola, you actually now have quite high or adequate rumen ammonias. The model right now, the CNCPS, we have it set up for cows to consume roughly 5 to 6 meals a day. It needs a better submodel for management and time budgets to accommodate some of what really happens on a dairy. That's a priority of ours. We're trying to use some of the data from Minor Institute, some of the work from Mike Miller to expand that a little bit and see if we can get that information into the model so you can all describe your cows a little bit better. Because what you see here is, depending on the diet, you're going to have different rumen ammonia concentrations. And depending upon what your starting point is, you may actually go below that 5.5. Now, in this case, those canola diets are not really detrimental to fiber digestibility. You may run out of some branch chain VFAs, which will inhibit the fiber bugs, but for the most part, your nitrogen's still kind of okay. If you do something like this, where you've got a highly soluble diet, and I'm going to focus on this red line, we get these big swings, and this is based on meal pattern, right? We got 4 meals a day, but then, I added the line on here because this is what it looks like. All of a sudden, you've got this time down below 5.5 where the rumen will be deficient, right? And here's where fiber digestibility is going to be inhibited and microbial yield will be inhibited, right? And we truncated it here simply to say, once you go below this point, you're going to start taking a hit on fiber digestibility. But if you were to allow this to go, it's actually going to go pretty low. So this essentially, in this particular example, this is simply saying, hey, we got to do a better job feeding the cows. We got to get feed pushed up. We got to have better feed delivery. Otherwise, they're going to slug feed, and we're going to see this kind of unusual and deleterious behavior. And, I never would have thought that the rumen would go into negative nitrogen balance throughout the day, given how fast nitrogen equilibrates across the system, the urea. But this is consistent with some of the studies that we've run. So this will be one of the enhancements, is we'll be able to look at this real time while you're formulating, if you know something about the time budget of the cows. And then back to the comment about Willet and LaPierre, their work in Canada. Here's endogenous nitrogen flows. And again, this was not in any previous version of the model. There's some incorporation of this into the new NASEM. And they looked at several studies where they looked at high fiber, low fiber, different ways of treating forage, and different levels of MP. And it's really interesting, they're fairly consistent, running from about 14 to 25, 26% endogenous nitrogen as a percent of the flow, which is a pretty large number when you think about it. You're saying, 20 Roughly 20% of what shows up at the duodenum is coming from endogenous slough cells, right? What was really interesting from their data, and this is captured in the model, here's bacterial nitrogen from endogenous amino acids. And again, I made the point in the introduction that some of this is going to transfer free to the small intestine, and some of it's going to be incorporated into the bacteria and then be transferred to the small intestine as part of that compartment. And the reason I point this out is that, that's pretty high quality protein in the endogenous nitrogen, amino acids, animal protein, and the bacteria are making pretty good use of it. And I think this is important when we think about how we feed the rumen and making sure, in the old days, Bill Chalupa, Jim Russell, Charlie Sniffen would all have us adding soybean meal to make sure that we provided enough peptides. That's still true. These cows respond, or the microbes respond to peptides, or the bacteria respond to peptides, but there's already some peptides in there. So we got to make sure that we don't overfeed the rumen some of this nitrogen source, and then it gets excreted out in the urine. So having this partition's really important for some of that. And then when you think about how we've been formulating diets, right? And we've done, I have to say, the industry's done a remarkable job with not a lot of information, right? Because as we have thought about formulating these diets, we've had the feed and we've had the bacteria. This is the amino acid profiles of the components, right? But, in reality, there's all these other things, the protozoa, the endogenous protein, the bile, and we can incorporate that now, right? So again, more information, different profiles, improved profiles. I'm not going to get into that today because that takes another seminar, but improved profiles because of improved recovery of amino acids, especially on the branched chains, but more information, right? And the protozoa, these guys are really important. We have a protozoal submodel. In this particular slide, I think I can remove that statement. I said working out a passage calculation correction before release. This was one of the problems. People will say, why is it taking you so long to get this out? And Charlie Sniffen especially has been after us to, come on, you guys have got to get that out. Well, we've been wanting to, but when we built the submodel here for protozoa, we actually didn't have, there's not a lot of data. There are very few data in the literature to describe protozoal flows. We don't mark them. Jeff Firkins and his group had done some good work. There's some other data out there, but it still didn't really tell us under all conditions how fast these guys would leave the rumen. So we had them associated with the solids passage rate. And we knew that wasn't right, and that's exactly where we were in the first couple times we were trying to run this thing. Basically, the protozoa were growing and eating all the bacteria, and NP allowable milks were 10 to 20 kilos below what they should have been. And it took us a while to figure out we got to tell these protozoa they have to leave the rumen. And that was one of Mike Dineen's studies with omasal flow in pastures, because that gave us a really good acid test of protozoal growth and everything. And so when we look at this, here's fiber bacteria and non-fiber bacteria, and don't worry about the time. We're looking at this prediction out here, 9 grams, about 3.5 grams per hour. If we turn on the protozoa really don't impact the fiber digesting bacteria much, but they sure impact the non-fiber bacteria, because these are mostly the liquid associated bacteria that these guys are predating. And you can see we went from 9 down to about 6, and that's an overestimation. These were made before we updated the flows, but it basically gives you some idea. It gives you some idea of some of the dynamics that are going on in there. And when you guys see the simulation time of 300 hours, this takes the computer a millisecond to do. So don't freak out about that. It's just that the model has to run long enough to stabilize, because we're starting from nothing, right? And we're trying to figure out how to overcome that. But don't worry, it solves very, very quickly. if you look at, on the contribution of protozoa, people say, well, how many protozoa do you actually get out of the rumen? So these are pasture cows, either all grass, the G, or grass plus rolled barley with the RB. Here's our nitrogen intakes. And if you come all the way down here and you look at protozoal non-ammonia nitrogen, 79 grams and 73 grams, which in these pasture cows are 20 to 24% of the microbial non-ammonia flow, right? So a significant amount of the amino acids being supplied to those cows, and probably the essential fatty acids too, if we want to get into that, but that's a different discussion, right? So don't underestimate the role of protozoa in meeting the amino acid requirements of the cow. I think, because we haven't had that information, we haven't known how to use it. Now that we have it, it's pretty interesting, and it changes how you think about diet formulation. So, what is the optimum amino acid supply for a cow? There's an efficiency of use. There's all these disposal routes, oxidation, anaplerosis, synthesizing non-essential amino acids, gluconeogenesis. I'm going to move quickly through this. We analyzed the literature, looked at predicted supply versus the actual supply, then tried to find optimums. Where on this curve did we find the greatest rate of change? Basically, the solution to the second derivative. And that gives us, there's digested methionine and there's model predicted methionine. Well, this gives us an efficiency. We can get an efficiency of use out of this, so that you then do the same kind of calculation instead of looking simply at MP, which is the way we've always done it in dairy cows. We did it as a function of the ME, and we could see we fit this line pretty well. And that gave us an optimum number. Again, where's the greatest rate of change away from productive efficiency? These are optimums, not maximums. And I think that's really important, and I'll come back to that. So this to us is not probably where everybody's going to formulate, but it's probably where you should start, right? It gives us a very quantitative number to start at, right? And we did this for all of them. This is lysine. It allows us to get a number for lysine, 3.03 grams per mcal of Me. And when you look at the same relationship as a function of the MP, it really doesn't mean much, right? So this gave us comfort that basing amino acid requirements on an mcal of Me actually gave us better resolution for making a discrete requirement than just trying to make it some percentage of the MP. Right, and when we look at these numbers, and the efficiencies, Helene Lapierre had done something very similar. The efficiencies actually in many cases are identical. Some are a little bit different. The bottom line, though, is that what it let us do is get to grams of amino acid per mcal of Me. Right, and I think this is the key to the whole thing, is this gives us a very discrete requirement. And they look similar to some of the older literature. Right. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. So when you look at it, when you put everything together, right, when you look at CNCPS predicted and observed total ammonia nitrogen flows at the omasum, here's observed, here's predicted, here's our line, here's our residuals, and this includes bacteria, integrated feed, protozoa, and endogenous nitrogen. So we feel pretty comfortable with these predictions. It's not always perfect, and again, over the last 10 to 12 years, we've kind of figured out where, and we've made refinements as we keep doing it. One of the other things we've done, and we've all had UNDF now for a few years, this version 655 lets us use it, but it's not nearly as dynamic as we'd like it to be. We're working to change that, right? And we know, here's corn silage, here's high quality Irish pasture. There's different sizes to the fast pool. There's differences in the slow pool. There's definitely differences in UNDF. This is going to cause changes to intake and fill-in flux and energy derivation, right? So we've basically, what we've done here is we've said, hey, based on the data from Minor, Bologna, Cornell, and a few other places, we've looked at, if we take a cow about 1,600 pounds or 750 kilograms, making about, 40, not quite 45 kilograms of milk, eating about 24 and a half, we can kind of estimate their NDF intake. And this is from 2017, where they had not such good forages. But we can kind of, using Mertens's numbers, say, all right, what's the maximum intake, and then how much should be in the rumen of a cow at any one time, right? And you can take, an average corn silage and a higher digestibility corn silage as you look at the UNDF and the fast pool, and a low digestibility corn silage, and if you plot out their time points, you don't see a big difference in the first 30 hours, so to speak, but by 30 hours, they start to open up, right? And here's where some of those differences come into play. And this is going to lead to different fill and flux behavior, right? Because the rumen can fill to here, and one of these is going to hit rumen fill, and one of these are not, and the base diet's right on the rumen fill line. So if we look at meal pattern and fill and flux, right, a cow eats a meal and it fills the rumen, and then it decays, and then she makes enough space that she can have another meal, and then she eats and it decays. Well, when you have a faster decay rate and a greater digestibility, a larger digestible pool, now all of a sudden it fills faster, which means now we can eat more, or the cow can consume more. So this is going to be incorporated in this version of the model. So while you're formulating, you will actually be able to look at rumen fill and flux and say, we're going to give you some upper bounds for UNDF. We're going to give you some upper bounds for total ANDF-OM. And then based on the diet, if it's a low digestibility, UNDF is going to be first limiting, which means you can't consume, that cow's not going to be able to consume that diet, which means your ME allowable milk and MP allowable milk are going to go down. This is exactly what we face right now. If you got a slightly higher digestibility, the UNDF is not the constraint, the total NDF is the constraint, right? But because it is, that means you could maybe eat another couple pounds of dry matter. Those cows could consume a couple more pounds of dry matter, and now all of a sudden you're making more milk, right? And again, this isn't going to solve everybody's problems, but as we change forages, change seasons, change whatever with heat stress and whatever else is going on out there, it's going to give us some greater information back to say, hey, if I'm seeing this, if I have another forage, I've got to try to modify that behavior so I don't take the hit on intake, right? So that'll be incorporated in this next version. So, the low digestibility will overfill, the higher digestibility will underfill. Okay, so what does the cow think of these changes? All right, so that was kind of a snapshot of, if you're formulating, those are the things you're going to want to know. How do I get my amino acids right? How is my rumen filling? What does my rumen nitrogen look like? All right, how much microbes am I going to get? Right, and we can add the protozoa to that now. So this was Ryan Higgs. This was the first application of the model. This was his PhD done a while ago. Many of you might have seen this already. Terrible conditions, a lot of heat stress. I'm not going to talk about all of it today, but the base diet was limited in methionine, MP, and rumen N, so that was a true negative control. We added back some methionine, but still limited in MP and rumen N. We added some methionine and urea, because the corn silage had really shifted in nitrogen content from formulation to fed. So we figured we were going to be deficient on rumen N. So I'm glad we did this. We didn't plan that way, but Chuck Schwab said there's no way the cows can recycle that much, Mike. I would add some urea. Thank God we did. Not because they can't recycle, it's because the corn silage was not the same all the way through the experiment from start to finish. Anyhow, plus then we had the positive control where everything was balanced and all essential amino acids were balanced. We did this for 100 days. Most important thing here, other than the milk, was that we did do a total track NDF digestion on every cow. Here's our diets. Again, you'll have the slides. You can always send me questions. Here's the diets: 13.5, 13.6% protein for the two the two diets, the base diet, base plus methionine, add the urea, we're at 14.6. Add everything, we're at 15.6, right? So we're sub 14 on these two diets. You can see where we were on methionine and lysine. Here's the optimums. We're not meeting either of those. Once we added the methionine, we're pretty much there, still not there in lysine. We add some urea, we're better because we're making more microbes because they were deficient, still haven't met the lysine. By the time we get to the positive now, everything should be positive for all of those amino acids, right? Everything looks pretty good. What the cows tell us, this is fascinating. If you just look at milk yield, 88.1, 89.5, 89.7, 92, not significantly different, right? That's really interesting. 13.5, 13.6, 14.6, 15.6. Energy corrected milk did take a hit. No difference in dry matter intake, but you can see the components coming into play here. 85, 86.6, 88.2. Again, none of those are significantly different. We hit significance in the last one at 92. Right. We took some fat component yield simply because yield hit because these cows, we were at 90, 94, 95 degrees in the barn and we couldn't cool them. So that's probably real milk fat depression, heat induced, just like Baumgarten roads tell us should happen. But the proteins were pretty telling and the milk was pretty interesting, right? So we learned a little bit here, said the cows actually responded to this attempt to formulate this way, right? Again, back to rumen nitrogen balance. These cows were predicted to be negative in rumen nitrogen balance. And in fact, we predicted a microbial growth depression, and there was a significant reduction in potentially digestible NDF in the diets where there was no urea. So in fact, the cow behavior and the predictions were all consistent with each other. One of the other things we did, and I see something's missing, is we asked the question here, what about variation, right? We pick the optimum. There's a range here, right? Which means, what happens if we go up or down one standard deviation on this methionine or on the lysine? I guess my arrow didn't copy through somehow. But there's a range in data here, right? Which would suggest, at this point, we could be as low as 2.5, or we could be as low as, or as high as 3, 3.5, or 3.6. So as part of his PhD, Andrew, there it is. So as part of his PhD, what we did is we tested those boundaries. Pen studies, I think it's important to say pen studies, 16 cows per pen, 144 cows, 60 to 120 days in milk. In the interest of time, I'm gonna keep moving, but here's the diets, heavy corn silage. But you can see, and I don't like to hide things. I want everybody to know what we're doing. Smartamine M and Smartamine ML to get our lysine methionine. We did use some blood meal, energy booster, dextrose, right? We're big sugar users here. No rumen escape, soybean here, but then obviously that all works into it as we're going to those, so here's our optimums, here's our negative, here's our positive, right? So all essential amino acids, as much as we could balance, were decreased one standard deviation and increased one standard deviation for the positive, right? So we're trying to figure out, do the cows respond if we go down one standard deviation, and or will they respond if we go up, or are there no changes? That, it's doing a sensitivity test. Here's the NDF. We were running 31 to 32% NDF, crude protein 14 to 16. We put a lot of, and I'm running out of time, but we put a lot of rumen ammonia in there. We used urea, made sure that there was adequate ammonia to keep the rumen in positive nitrogen balance as we varied the crude protein. Starch running around 29, sugar not quite where we wanted it, but that's okay. But heavy, pretty heavy fiber diets from that perspective, and kind of maintained our MEs. There's our amino acids. Again, in the interest of time, you can see the titration, 71, 78, 92. lysine 201, 222, 250, right? So if you just take those two, we did a good job of opening them up. If you look at milk yield and energy corrected milk yield, what the cows essentially said is if you're going to go down 1 standard deviation on amino acids, we don't like that, right? And I think what's really interesting is if you look at not just the protein, right? We see some nice changes in protein, but if you actually look at the fat yields too, because sometimes when I say amino acids are really helpful for fat, they go, I don't understand. Well, if you look at this, right, here's our energy corrected milk, 90, 96, 99. So definitely significant there. There's a trend between these two. Again, I said these are optimums, not maximums. So it says maybe if you give them a little bit more, you're going to pick up some response, but it's not 6 pounds, right? If we're just talking pounds, right? Here's 90 to 96, 96 to 99. So we're looking at a diminishing return. If you look at the protein and the fat, yep, you see the same kind of thing. Big difference, not such a big difference. Big difference, not such a big difference. There's a little difference there, but not extraordinary, right? So this gave us a lot of comfort saying, hey, these optimums aren't so bad. You might pick up a little bit more if you give them some more. Again, optimums versus maximums. And just to reiterate, this was a pen study, right? We wanted to feed these cows. We had been criticized in the past for saying, well, you do these perfect studies in these perfect conditions. Well, we ran this one and we run all of them pretty much like a dairy farmer, right? We're going to mix them in a mixer wagon and deliver them. And because if we can do this here, then anybody can do it. I'm going to finish real quickly here so we can get to questions. This is a dose titration of rumensin. It has nothing to do with amino acids per se. What was intriguing to me about the request from Elanco to do this study is they were going to let me build whatever diet we wanted, right? Make a modern diet. So we used everything we've learned from the CNCPS over the last 10 years, version 7, and we applied it. I just want to show you what that looks like. And I'm going to do this fast because I want to get to questions. Prior to going on this diet, the cows we allocated were making 93 pounds of milk, 3.9 fat, and 3.1 true protein at about 120 days in milk, right? This is pretty important for what I'm going to show you next. All right, the diets are here. Here's the dry matter intake inclusion. I'm not going to talk about everything here because we're running out of time, but we're pretty heavy on the amino acids, blended in the fats, brought in some sugar, did not overfeed fat. 32% NDF, 15.7 on protein, 26 starch, 5% sugar, 54% forage, ether extract. I know ether extract, but don't shoot me for that. 4.4. Methionine, 80 grams, lysine, formulated at 216. And again, 1.19 and 3.03 are the numbers we used for 6.65 or 6.55. Here's our days in milk, 190 to 168 to 193. Dry matter intakes were roughly 59 to 60 pounds, 61. Milk yields, 82, 86, 85, 85. All right, so not bad for later lactation cows. Energy corrected milk, 100 to 103, almost 103.5. Didn't get fat. Here's what's interesting. Milk fat, 4.6, 4.6, 4.7, 4.6. Remember, these are on rumensin too. Milk protein, 335, 338, 336, 339. We were 7 pounds of components on cows, 190 and greater days in milk. In the Northeast, on a high corn silage diet, fed rumensin. That's the take home. The point is that through all of these iterations, as we do this work and we plow it back into the model, we're kind of refining what we understand about amino acid requirements. And as we get those amino acid requirements right, and then do the sugar thing, think about components, the cows are responding really, really well. All right. So they're making a lot. The more important thing here is how do we get that milk fat, right? And Barbano called me up. Dave Barbano is part of the study. And he calls me up, 4 weeks into the study and said, did you buy Jersey cows? And I said, no. He goes, those are Holsteins. I said, yes. He goes, they can't be. I said, why is that? He said, because they can't make that much de novo fat. I said, well, I don't know about that. We got to talk about this because they are definitely black and white. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because if you take his information from the nutrition conference, he would say Holstein's, if you look at Holstein fat, de novo, and mixed grams per grams, his data stops just over 4. Our cows were operating here. And he said they're just like jerseys. And sure enough, they're in the top third of the jerseys. Right. So the point I'm bringing up here is that not only have we changed how you're going to formulate diets to some point, but we think we have some pretty good requirement data tied to the supply where we can get cows to respond in ways we probably haven't seen before. So that's the other thing that's coming. So new models constructed, we want to make sure we understand rumen function, ANDFOM, digestibility, essential amino acid, and nitrogen supply. We've incorporated lots of things, as I've shown you. We've got new estimates for amino acid requirements, and I think in a good condition, we can make 90 to 100 pounds of milk with a diet that's in that 14% crude protein range, right? I don't know how we can implement on all dairies, and we probably can't. The idea is as we get better at describing these requirements, that's where we're going to be. I think anybody and everybody who's helped us with this, either financially or in kind, there's a lot of support out there, and I appreciate all of it. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mike. But before we get started answering the questions, we'd like to share a brief video, and then we'll be right back to answer the questions submitted during today's presentation. Organic trace minerals come in many types and formulations, leading to confusion about chemistry, terminology, and methodologies. With Balchem's Keysure line of chelated minerals, we provide superior performance and exceptional value by keeping it simple. Binding minerals to the highest quality plant protein-derived amino acids and peptides in our world-class production facilities, using a true chelation process pioneered by Balchem and trusted in both the human and animal arenas for nearly 60 years. The Keysure line delivers proven and consistent bioavailability to maximize performance, and a no-frills pricing approach for greater profitability. Visit balchemanh.com to see how Keysure chelated minerals are your link to superior performance and exceptional value. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the Q&A tab at the top of your screen. Mike, our first question is coming from Marco. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Van Amburgh. Marco would like to know when version 7 will be available commercially.
Oh, Marco. We are desperately hoping to have it in the hands of anybody who wants, from a licensing, NDS, AMTS, Dalix, whomever wants it, before the end of this calendar year.
Excellent.
We're working really hard to get it out the door.
Okay. Next question. Betty wants to know if all the major U.S. forage analysis labs are reporting all the values needed for version 7 feed inputs.
Yeah, Betty, to the best of our knowledge, they are. Maybe not always with the best precision, but they are providing that information, right? And that's one of those things. Feed chemistry has always been an iterative process. I used to sit and have long conversations with Van Soest, and he'd tell me there's 13 different variations on NDF, right? And thank God Dave Mertens got an AOAC publication and approval out on that, which kind of standardizes it a little bit, but we're still not quite there. The digestibility part of it is really where we're still quite variable. So we've got to work to get that part standardized.
And that kind of leads us to our next question coming from Hector. Now, Hector says, since 1986, he's been studying the Cornell model, and is always very interested in it, but he's from Argentina, and he said it's not easy for nutritionists to have the necessary information to use the model, especially in grazing conditions. The complexity of the model conspires against its use. That's often mentioned as a concern. What do you think about this comment?
Yep. Yes, Hector. I am conscious of that. We are trying to figure out, I don't think the word is dumb it down. We're trying to figure out how to cut some corners. Here's the problem, Hector, and this is, I know you guys in grazing situations, are hamstrung by a lack of dry matter intake, right? But that's gonna be a problem for any nutrition model, right? There's no perfect prediction for intake, and I don't think we're ever going to have one. And I'm probably not going to spend a whole lot of time on that particular aspect. What I do know, that seems to be the weakness, right? And what I do know, though, is where we've been able to generate good intake data on pasture-fed cows, the model works remarkably well. So how to bridge that gap. The chemistry is easy. We can do that almost all with NIR now. The NIR predictions are getting better. I think we just have to figure out how do we estimate intake more precisely for your conditions. And I've been working with some of the people at Chagas. We've talked about that. I don't think anybody's got a good answer yet, but it's on our radar. How's that?
Sounds good. Your next question comes in from Michael. He said, with trying to reduce methane, hence possibly less protozoa, how is this going to affect efficiencies, in particular with regards to fiber and BE modeled?
Great question. Something I spend way too much time on right now. Well, not too much time. I spend a lot of time. I don't like to say the word methane anymore. I think we're going to do damage if we want to try to take out the protozoa, so we're probably not going to do that. I think the question comes down to, do we absolutely have to reduce methane quantity, or we have to reduce intensity, right? And I think there's a group of us, I think there's a lot of people that are starting to recognize ruminants are ruminants. Eventually, we may get to a product that reduces methane production, that is consistent, and that doesn't do any damage to the system. So that we can't ignore that. But right now, the smartest thing we can do is increase the amount of milk per unit of methane produced, so reduce the intensity. And there's ways, we're working on ways right now where we can do that anywhere from 10 to 20%. Right, which is really big, right? The problem is that means less cows. So there's another sticky wicket. So yeah, no, the methane thing's out there. It's a complicated discussion.
Okay. Your next question are, what are your thoughts on dietary nitrogen levels for early lactation cows or fresh cows?
Yeah, so we've had a few people. No, it's a good question. I didn't address that here. So what we've had people do is apply the same concepts to a fresh cow as we're doing to some of the cows I showed you in this study, like the last study that I showed you. So we're using the same metrics for amino acids. So if the cows are going to consume, 20 kilos of dry matter instead of 25, in the first week or two, and we know how many mcals of energy that is, we're going to formulate to those levels, and then we're going to make sure that the rumen nitrogen balance is met like we always do. And when that happens, when we do that, the cows respond with more milk. Right, and Joe McFadden has a transition cow study where they only focused on methionine, but their fresh cows, if I remember the number right, was like 7 pounds more milk using those methane numbers, or using those methionine numbers. See, you get the methionine thing using those methionine numbers, 1.19 grams per mcal. They weren't quite 1.19, they were like 1.17 at formulation and fed.
Excellent. Okay, your next question comes from Mike. How similar is the NASEM model to CNCPS version 7?
They are very different. They're almost, yeah. They're from a rumen compartment. They're very different. We have separate where they combined. So they don't have any nitrogen recycling. They drive all of their rumen requirements from RDP, just like they did in the 2001. We have complete nitrogen recycling. And then on their amino acids, they don't predict the amino acids of protozoa and bacteria. They assume a constant ratio of those two and then use a merged an averaged amino acid proportion. Whereas we have two bacterial pools and two protozoal pools, and they're going to flux as the diet fluxes, and we're just incorporating all of that information, and we have complete nitrogen recycling. So just on that alone, they're very, very different.
Okay. Your next question comes from Bryce. Will version 7 have the neonatal calf model?
Yep. Yes, Bryce, the intention, we're hoping to finish that up before Christmas and package that along with everything else. It'll be a birth to death kind of thing. So when you start feeding a calf, you'll be able to feed that calf through the transition and weaning through, pre-puberty to puberty to calving to whenever you're done.
Okay. Next question comes from Weib. Well, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but for in vitro nitrogen digestibility, is version 7 using the different numbers by compartment or total indigestible nitrogen like it is an input in version 6.55?
Just like 655. Yeah, what we really need to know is what's the intestinal digestibility, what's the small intestine digestibility. Once we have that, that actually helps us a lot. That actually gives us the opportunity to calculate rates of digestion, because one of the issues with trying to calculate rates of digestion of the protein pools in the past is that we don't have a pool size, right? So it becomes very ambiguous with this UN estimation on the protein feeds. It makes calculating a pool size much more discrete, which gives us a better estimation of a rate.
Okay. Your next question is from Greg, and Greg is saying the original CNCPS model was developed as a utilitarian model covering both beef and dairy cattle. In your perspective, do you have any information on applicability of version 7 for beef cattle, particularly in finishing conditions?
We have the capability of bolting. We have not done that, Greg. So we have the capability of bolting the rumen submodel to the beef calculations and making some upgrades there. Nobody has been asking us for that, so we haven't spent a lot of time on it. But it is possible. It's all still there. All the architecture that was there at the beginning, with modifications, is still there. We just haven't spent a lot of time on the beef side here recently.
Okay. Next question is from Chad. Will any of the published effects of additives be incorporated into the model, or do you expect this to be handled by third-party license holders?
Yeah. So, yes, probably not all of them. We have some money right now. We've been working on Rumensin. The data are really kind of mixed, but I think we finally got to an answer on Rumensin that will be incorporated. Sam Fezedin did a study on fermentin. We are incorporating the fermentin effect on there because it actually works differently than what we originally thought. So that will be incorporated. We have requests from 3 other groups to model some of those rumen modifiers. So we will be doing that in-house here, and that will be ported out to all the license holders. So it all depends on how the company wants to engage. If they want to engage us, we're happy to work with them to do this. It's an iterative process, right? Because we don't know everything. But if there are data missing, here's the hard part. If there are data missing, we're not going to take a bunch of in vitro data and just come up with some equation that says this is how it works in a cow, because that's where we got caught on something like fermentin. We actually got caught on rumensin on that. And that's a longer conversation.
Next question is from Janati. Will there be a published book describing the model?
Yes, we're going to make a manual with case studies. We're going to build the case studies into the release, so everybody's going to have that information so they can understand how to make best use of all this. Yeah, I don't know if there'll be a book, Gennady, but there will be some sort of a document that walks everybody through what the model's doing and how to best use the information. And then we'll give you, kind of like what Bill Chalupa used to be doing with CPM dairy, right? The 100-pound cow. Everybody went back to that when they got confused about something. Probably won't be quite like that, but yeah, we will have that kind of information.
Okay, we have reached the top of the hour and gone past it by just a tad, but we've got a lot of questions yet. We'll take a couple more. Next question, Hermano is asking, did you make any changes on the cow's requirement side? As an example, ME requirements.
At this point, we have not. It's a good question, Hermano. I know that the NASEM committee increased the maintenance requirement of our cows by, I think it's 20%. But it's an interesting thing. When they increase the requirements by 20%, they decrease the efficiency of use of energy for maintenance, so they can partition the rest of it to lactation, which means the efficiency of use of lactation goes up, right? So it's kind of that, to balance it out, they only ate so many mCals, so you still have to have 70 mCals of energy that you distributed to the system, because that's what they consumed. In all of our evaluations so far, we have not needed to invoke that. And we went through the exercise with the heifers because there's good information out of France and some calves that would suggest that they do produce more heat. And Rodrigo Milano, as part of its PhD, modeled through all of that. And in the end, it didn't matter, because it just meant that, yes, if they're using a little bit more energy, they use a lower efficiency of use. And the partitioning didn't really help us explain how to get more productivity out of the cows or the calves or anything. So that's where we're at right now. If somebody can make a really good case, I'm happy to change. It's not that hard.
Okay. Well, and we'll finish up with a last question. In your opinion, what is the best predictor of dry matter intake? UNDF 30, 48, 240?
All of the above.
Okay.
No, and you can make a, the NASEM committee, Mike Allen, in his intake equation used 48. Right. Well, the industry hasn't used 48 consistently as a single number for a very long time. Can you do it with 30? Yeah, we can do it with 30. I feel much better if I have a 30, 120, 240, and I understand the pools. I can get that. You got to know the UNDF. That's the big thing. And you got to know the size of the fast pool. So whatever numbers we need to get the size of the fast pool and the total digestibility of the NDF that goes in there is what we need. And right now, you could use 24 or 30. You could use 96 or 120. We still need 240 because not everybody defines their samples well enough that we know how much legume versus grass is in there. So we're still stuck on 240.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for hanging in with us. Thank you, Mike. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Now, if you do have additional questions, please submit them to anh.marketing@balchem.com. The Real Science lecture series of webinars will continue on October 4th when we're joined by Dr. Kevin Harvatine from Penn State University. Kevin will be sharing the top tips for managing for both fat and protein production in a tiered pricing system. Also plan to join us on November 15th when we welcome back Dr. Temple Grandin to share insights into animal behavior and autism. Visit balchem.com/realscience for more details and to register for all future webinars. Balchem's podcast series continues to offer a deeper dive into our webinar topics. Log on to your favorite podcast platform or visit balchem.com/podcast. We recently shared 3 installments highlighting the newest research from ADSA, and we've also published our 50th episode, so there's a wonderful library of topics to choose from. Subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address, and we'll send you a cool Real Science Exchange t-shirt. On behalf of Balchem and Dr. Van Amburgh, thank you for joining us today.